There's a kind of silence that isn't empty. It's heavy. It sits between two people who used to speak without thinking, and now one of them has gone quiet. You notice it first in the small things. The text that sits unread for 6 hours. The dinner where the fork hits the plate louder than any voice. The bed that feels wider than it is. And if you're the one left in the noise, you start to wonder if you did something, or if he just stopped caring. But silence is rarely about you. It's usually about a door he's trying to close from the inside, before anyone sees the room behind it. Most people think silence is punishment. The silent treatment, they call it. A weapon. And sometimes it is. But there's a deeper pattern most miss. Psychologists who study attachment, the way we learn to bond in childhood, found something quietly devastating. When a boy grows up in a home where emotions are met with indifference, or worse, with shame, he learns that speaking is dangerous. Not because he'll be hit. Because he'll be invisible. A 7-year-old who cries and is told to man up doesn't stop feeling. He stops showing. By 30, that same man goes silent not because he wants to hurt you, but because he's protecting something he was never allowed to have. Let me give you a name. Call him Elias. Elias is 34. He's been with his partner for 3 years. They've built a life that looks stable from the outside. Shared lease. A dog. Weekend routines. But 6 months ago, Elias got passed over for a promotion he'd prepared 2 years for. He didn't tell his partner the night it happened. He made dinner. He asked about her day. And then he went to the bathroom and sat on the edge of the tub for 20 minutes, staring at the grout between the tiles. Not because he didn't trust her. Because saying it out loud would make it real. And he wasn't sure he could survive it being real yet. This is what the research calls emotional self-sufficiency. It sounds like strength. It looks like composure. But it's actually a survival strategy from childhood, hardened into identity. Dr. Edward Tronick's famous still face experiment showed something heartbreaking. When a mother stops responding to her baby, the baby tries everything, smiling, waving, screaming, to get the connection back. And when nothing works, the baby turns away. Not because the baby doesn't want love. Because the wanting became too painful. That baby grows up. He learns to turn away before anyone turns away from him. Silence becomes preemptive. A shield he doesn't even know he's holding. Now here's where it gets complicated. Because silence isn't always retreat. Sometimes it's processing. Men are often, not always, but often, socialized to problem solve internally. To chew on something until it makes sense before offering it to the world. A woman in the same study might talk her way through the confusion, using conversation as a way to discover what she feels. But Elias, and many men like him, needs to feel certain before he speaks. Because if he speaks uncertainly, and someone challenges him, he feels exposed in a way that registers as physical threat. Heart rate spikes. Cortisol floods. The body remembers what the mind tries to forget. There's a study from 2018 that tracked communication patterns in couples during conflict. The researchers found something that surprised even them. When men went silent during an argument, 64% of the time it correlated with physiological flooding, that fight or flight state where rational conversation becomes literally impossible. Not metaphorically. Literally. The prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that handles nuance and empathy, starts to go offline. The man isn't choosing to shut down. His nervous system is making an executive decision he can't override. And if his partner keeps pushing, keeps demanding he talk right now, she's asking a drowning man to describe the water. But we need to be honest about the other side. Because sometimes silence is control. Sometimes it's the stonewall of a man who knows exactly what he's doing. Who discovered early that withdrawal makes people chase. That absence creates value. That if he stays quiet long enough, someone else will fill the space with apology, with accommodation, with the emotional labor he refuses to offer. This is what therapists call demand-withdraw pattern, and it can become a cage for both people. She demands connection because the silence feels like death. He withdraws because the demand feels like attack. And round they go, each becoming more extreme version of themselves. So how do you tell the difference between a man who's flooded and a man who's manipulating? Between protection and punishment? There's no perfect test. But there is a question worth asking. Does the silence end? A flooded man will eventually come back. Sometimes hours later. Sometimes a day. But he returns with something, an attempt, however clumsy, to bridge what broke. The stonewaller never really returns. The silence becomes the relationship. The room he goes to gets furniture. A TV. A life of its own. And if you're waiting for someone who's made a home in his withdrawal, you're not waiting for communication. You're waiting for someone who has already left. Let's talk about what silence costs. Not to the relationship. To the man himself. Because the same mechanism that protects him in conflict becomes the thing that isolates him in grief. In failure. In the ordinary human need to be witnessed. Elias, remember him? 6 months after the promotion fell through, he still hadn't spoken about it. Not to his partner. Not to his brother. Not to the therapist he'd scheduled and canceled 3 times. And the feeling didn't go away. It calcified. Became part of his posture, his sleep, the way he drove too fast on empty highways. Unprocessed emotion doesn't disappear. It converts. Into back pain. Into drinking. Into the blank stare at a birthday party where everyone's laughing and he's calculating how soon he can leave. Carl Jung wrote about the shadow, the parts of ourselves we exile because they weren't welcomed. For many men, the shadow is emotional. It's the grief they never cried. The fear they never admitted. The tenderness they learned to perform rather than feel. And here's what Jung understood that we keep forgetting. The shadow doesn't stay exiled. It finds back doors. It comes out as rage at a minor inconvenience. As obsession with work. As the inability to be present during intimacy. The silence isn't empty. It's full of everything he wouldn't say. And the longer the door stays closed, the more pressure builds behind it. There's a moment in every silent man's life that he rarely talks about. The breaking point. Not the dramatic kind. The quiet kind. Elias finally spoke at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday. Not because he planned to. Because his partner didn't ask. She just sat beside him on the couch, not looking at him, not touching him, and said, "You don't have to say anything. I'm not going anywhere." And something in that, the permission to not perform, the absence of demand, made the words possible. He talked for 40 minutes. Mostly about the promotion. But also about his father, who never missed a day of work even with pneumonia, and what it meant to be a man who needed something. The research calls this a secure base. A place where silence isn't punished, so speech becomes safe. If you're the one who loves a silent man, there's something you need to hear carefully. You cannot love someone out of their silence. That's not how nervous systems work. What you can do, and this is hard, this is genuinely hard, is stop making the silence about your inadequacy. When he goes quiet, your amygdala screams rejection. It's designed to. But most of the time, it's not rejection. It's regulation. He's trying to feel safe enough to come back. And if you meet his withdrawal with pursuit, with anxiety, with the perfectly human need to fix it now, you confirm his oldest fear. That emotions are dangerous. That closeness costs too much. That he was right to hide. But this isn't about making excuses. It's about understanding the architecture. Because the man who goes silent also has responsibility. He has to learn, ideally with help, with therapy, with the brutal work of self-confrontation, that silence is a starting point, not a destination. That withdrawing to process is acceptable, but withdrawing to avoid is a slow death. Marcus Aurelius, who knew something about carrying weight quietly, wrote that we have power over our mind, not outside events. The translation for modern life: you don't control what flooded you, but you control whether you come back. Whether you explain, eventually, that you needed space. Whether you build the skill of re-entry. Because silence without return is just abandonment wearing a mask. I want to tell you about a different kind of silence. The kind that comes after. Elias, a year later. He still goes quiet sometimes. Stress at work. Conflict at home. The old pattern doesn't vanish. But now there's a difference. He says, I need an hour. Or, can we talk about this tomorrow? I'm not myself right now. It's not poetry. It's not healed. It's functional. And functionally, it changes everything. His partner knows the silence has an end date. He knows he has to come back with words, even imperfect ones. The silence becomes a room with a door, not a wall. And that distinction, between a pause and a fortress, is where the relationship lives or dies. There's a cost to living in a world that only values the loud. The man who processes slowly, who needs to retreat to think, who speaks in paragraphs instead of tweets, he's often pathologized. Diagnosed with avoidant personality when he's just cautious. Called emotionally unavailable when he's actually deeply feeling but poorly trained. And the tragedy is, many of these men want to be known. Desperately. They just don't trust the path there. Because every time they've tried, someone asked for the edited version. The highlight reel. The feeling that can be resolved in a single conversation. But some feelings need to live in silence first. They need the dark to germinate. The mistake is thinking that dark means dead. So here's what I want you to sit with. If you're the silent one, the man who goes quiet, who shuts down, who feels the walls close in when emotions run high, your silence is information. It's telling you where you're still wounded. Where you learned that survival meant disappearing. And it's asking you, softly but persistently, to build a different exit. Not from the feeling. Through it. If you're the one who loves him, your patience is not infinite and shouldn't be. But your understanding can be deeper than your fear. And that depth, the choice to not take the silence personally, to hold space without demanding performance, might be the only thing that makes speech possible again. Not guaranteed. But possible. And possibility, in the architecture of human connection, is everything.